My children have grown up in this place, with this place. I can remember 20 years ago when Galen gave Abby a Dharma name at our previous location, just up the street. And then a couple of years later gave August his own Dharma name. August is going to go to college in August. The other August. And I want to thank this Sangha for being present to help Hannah and me raise these two incredible children. We couldn't have done it without you, and I truly mean that. I mentioned that I'd been doing some traveling recently, and I mean it. In early March, I went to Colorado for spring break, for my children's spring break for a week. We were lucky to bring along Augie's 6 best friends, right, who were beautifully behaved. I then flew from Denver to Marrakesh, Morocco, where I met my own 6 best friends from growing up in high school. One of them is a travel expert. He had taken us and shown us Greece several years ago, and his other specialty is in Morocco. And so we went there and spent 2.5 weeks going all around this incredible, incredible country. I followed that up with a trip to Madrid, where I met Hannah to recognize and celebrate her 60th birthday. I then came back here for a week to try to dig out of email piles and text piles the band I play in, amateur band, played in a benefit concert, competition of the bands, and we won the judge's choice somehow. I then departed and went to Antigua for a week to sail on my really good friend's sailboat. He had it built and sailed it across the Atlantic Ocean, and it's now in the Caribbean, and I went on the boat. Before coming back here, played another rock and roll show just yesterday, all while a kind of global financial crisis is raging. I'm a financial advisor, and this was the background to all of that. And I can identify the 3 times that I sat zazen over this period. That's it. That was it. Once was in a midday quiet period in between touring in Morocco in a beautiful courtyard. Those of you who've been there know how beautiful that is. Another time was waking up on the boat when everything was quiet in the harbor. Yeah. And another time was in Colorado. And as I frequently do through this trip, I felt like my practice feels discontinuous. Absolutely discontinuous. Sporadic. Occasional. Even fraudulent. And so with those feelings came an invitation from Galen Roshi to speak, of course, about fascicle 16A of the Shobo Genzo, continuous practice. Couldn't have picked a better person. She's very wise in that way. Knows just where to give you teaching. And so there I was in our Madrid hotel, realizing if I didn't get on it, April 27th was going to get on me pretty quickly. Where was I going to get Shobogenzo in my Madrid hotel room? Internet to the rescue again. I downloaded it on Google Play, and I've spent much of the past week on my iPhone reading 16a. And I welcome the chance to talk with you about it today. How many of you have read that particular fascicle, Continuous Practice? I'm sure there's quite a number, 5 or 6 or 10 or something. So I'll apologize to those of you if I don't do it justice. I went to Wikipedia, and the Shobogenzo itself is very interesting. This is what it says. In Mahayana Buddhism, the term True Dharma Eye Treasury, or the Japanese word Shobogenzo, refers generally to the Buddha Dharma. The Dharma of Buddha. And in Zen Buddhism, it specifically refers to the realization of Buddha's awakening that is not contained in the written words of the sutras. So we can say Dogen wrote this in, 1243, etc. But generally what we are hearing in Shobogenzo is the Buddha Dharma. In general Buddhist usage, the term treasury of the Dharma refers to the written words of the Buddha's teaching collected in the sutras. General Buddhist usage, as opposed to Zen tradition. And it refers to the middle of the 3 treasures of the Buddha, that is, the Dharma. In Zen, however, the real treasure of the Dharma, as we all know, is not to be found in books, but in one's own Buddha nature and the ability to see correct view. What we know as Zazen. In the legends of the Zen tradition, the Shobogenzo has been handed down from teacher to student, going all the way back to the Buddha, when he transmitted the Shobogenzo to his disciple Mahakashyapa, thus beginning the Zen lineage that Bodhidharma brought to China. This was important for me to read, so that as I read this fascicle about continuous practice, I didn't feel only as if I'm reading Dogen. This is Dogen. This is only Dogen. I don't think Dogen would have seen it that way. Dogen would have thought he was transmitting the Buddha Dharma from the ancestors, again, as Alberto spoke so beautifully about. And so I decided to talk about this fascicle, this portion today, out of order, not going through it chronologically, but beginning with the ancestors and the stories that are told about them and continuous practice. Compassionate Father, great teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, was engaged in continuous practice in the deep mountains from the time he was 19 years old. At age 30, after practicing continuously, He attained the way simultaneously with all sentient beings on the great earth. I think that's really interesting. We think of him attaining the way alone or on his own, but he attained the way simultaneously with all sentient beings on the great earth, implying that Buddha's awakening was codependent, as it was, on all sentient beings. Until he was 80 years old, his practice was sustained in mountains, forests, and monasteries. He did not return to the palace, nor did he claim any property. He wore the same robes and held the same bowls throughout his lifetime. From the time he began teaching, he was not alone, even for a day or for an hour. He did not reject offerings from humans and devas. He was patient with the criticism of people outside the way. Wearing the pure robes and begging for food, the Buddha's lifetime of teaching was nothing but continuous practice. And as I read this in my hotel in Madrid, I began to take some heart. Maybe it's all right if I'm not sitting zazen this morning. Another story told about Mahakashyapa, the heir to Buddha. My understanding, sort of the right-hand man. The 8th ancestor after the 7 original Buddhas is Shakyamuni Buddha's heir. Throughout his lifetime, he was engaged without negligence in the 12 ascetic practices. Anybody know about these 12 ascetic practices? See how many of them you all do. The first, not to accept invitations from people. Royce, you sort of do that. To practice begging daily. And not to receive money as an alternative for food. That was just the first of the ascetic practices. The second one, to stay on mountains and not in villages or towns. Who's doing that one? Number 3, not to ask for or accept clothing, but to take clothing from the dead in cemeteries and dye and sew the cloth for robes. Number 4, to take shelter under a tree in the field. Isn't that beautiful? To take shelter under a tree in the field. Number 5, to have one meal a day, meaning only one meal a day. Number 6, not to lie down day or night, but to practice walking meditation and sleep sitting up. Anybody doing that one? Number 7, to own 3 robes and nothing more. And not to lie down with a robe on. Number 8 is to live in cemeteries rather than in monasteries or houses. To sit zazen and seek the way while gazing at skeletons. Does anybody remember the scene in Hamlet, of Hamlet finding the skull of his former servant? Yorick. And he says, "Alas, poor Yorick," as he thinks about eternity and mortality. This is one of the ascetic practices, to gaze upon skeletons. 9, to seek out a solitary place with no desire to lie down with or to be close to others. Number 10 is to eat fruit before the meal and not after. I don't know the origin of that. Number 11, to sit in an open space and not to desire to sleep under a house or under a tree or in a house. And number 10, not to eat meat or cream and not to rub the body with flax oil. These are called the 12 ascetic practices. Venerable Mahakashyapa did not turn back or deviate from them throughout his lifetime. Even after authentically receiving the Tathagata's treasury of the True Dharma Eye, he did not retire from these practices. In other words, after the Buddha elevated Mahakashyapa, Mahakashyapa did not elevate himself from his ascetic practices. Once the Buddha said, and this is a quote, "You are old now. You should eat like the rest of the monks." Mahakashyapa said, "If I had not encountered the Tathagata, I would have remained a self-enlightened Buddha, living in mountains and forests. Fortunately, I have met the Tathagata. This is a beneficent gift of Dharma. So, I cannot forego my ascetic practice and eat like the rest of the monks." The Tathagata admired his determination. At another time, Mahakashyapa looked exhausted because of his ascetic practices. No kidding. And the monks looked down on him. Then the Tathagata graciously called Mahakashyapa up to him and offered him half of his seat. Thus, Mahakashyapa sat on the Tathagata's seat. Know that Mahakashyapa was the most senior monk in the assembly of the Buddha. It is impossible to list all the practices he did in his lifetime. And as I read that, I began to see that there's a lot involved in continuous practice. A lot. And there's no one way to continuous practice, is there? Mahakashyapa had his way. And even when Buddha urged Mahakashyapa to adopt another way of continuous practice, maybe an easier way, one more copacetic with the monks, Mahakashyapa said, "Well, this is my way." A few more, 2 more. These, after all, are our ancestors, and these are the stories about them and their continuous practice. We should hear them. Hui Nang, who would later become the 6th Chinese ancestor, was a woodcutter from Xin region, who could hardly be called learned, just as I can hardly be called learned. And I mean that. He lost his father when very young and was brought up by his old mother. He worked as a woodcutter to support her. upon hearing a phrase from a sutra at the crossroads in town, he left his mother and set out in search of Dharma. He was a great vessel, rare for any time, an outstanding practitioner of the way. Separating from his loving mother must have been more difficult than cutting off his own arm. Setting aside his filial obligation was not lightly done. Throwing himself into Hongren's assembly, Sangha, his Sangha, on Mount Huangmei, Huineng pounded rice day and night for 8 months without sleep or rest. He received the authentic transmission of the robe and bowl at midnight. After being entrusted with the Dharma, he continued to pound rice for 8 years, traveling with a grinding stone on his back. Even after he emerged in the world and expounded Dharma to awaken people, he did not neglect this grinding stone. His continuous practice was rare in the world. Not a word about Zazen in that parable, is there? Not a word about meditation. Only grinding rice. And I began to feel on those travels I told you about, maybe this travel is my continuous practice. Maybe being on this boat and seeing things in Morocco and so forth. This is where the practice is right now. One more short story about another ancestor. From the time he was the attendant to Ma Zu until he died, Bai Zhang, who would later become Zen Master Daiji, did not let a single day pass without working for the assembly or for others. Did not let a single day pass without working for the Sangha or for others outside the Sangha. He graciously gave us the model of a day of no work is a day of no eating. When Bai Zhang was old, he labored just like those in their prime. The assembly was concerned about him, but he did not stop working. At last, some students hid the tools from him during the work period. They're going to show him. They're going to get him to slow down, right? They're going to hide his tools. He refused to eat that day, expressing his regret that he could not join the assembly's communal work without his tools. This is Bai Zhang's exemplification of a day of no work is a day of no eating. The wind of the Linji school, which is now widely spread in Song, China, as well as the wind of other schools, represents the continuous practice of Bai Zhang's profound teaching. So these are the descriptions of continuous, sustained practice. This is the assignment I was given, to read this and to try and understand this about continuous practice. As I went from place to place feeling like a fraud about my practice because I wasn't sitting every single morning or sitting between tour guides, etc. Now I thought, it would be appropriate to go to the beginning of the chapter where we hear the words of the Buddha Dharma. Yes, this is Dogen writing, but as I said at the start of the talk, I would like everyone to hear the words of the Buddha through Dogen. These are the words of the Buddha about continuous practice. And now maybe we can hear them arising from these stories about these ancestors and their own continuous practice. Dogen says, the Buddha says, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. It forms the circle of the way and is never cut off. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there is not a moment's gap. Continuous practice is the circle of the way. This being so, continuous practice is undivided, not forced by you or others. The power of this continuous practice confirms you as well as others. It means your practice affects the entire earth and the entire sky in the 10 directions. Although not noticed by others or by yourself, it is so. Accordingly, by the continuous practice of all Buddhas and ancestors, your practice is actualized and your great road opens up. By your continuous practice, the continuous practice of all Buddhas is actualized and the great road of all Buddhas opens up. Your continuous practice creates the circle of the way. By this practice, Buddha ancestors abide as Buddha, not abide as Buddha, have Buddha mind, and attain Buddha without cutting off. Because of this practice, there are the sun, the moon, and stars. Because of this practice, there are the great earth and the open sky. Because of this practice, there are body, mind, and their environs. Because of this practice, there are the 4 great elements and the 5 skandhas. Continuous practice is not necessarily something people in the world love. We see that today, don't we? Wherever we look, we see that continuous practice is not necessarily something in the world that people love. But it should be the true place of return for everyone. Because of the continuous practice of all Buddhas of the past, present, and future, all Buddhas of the past, present, and future are actualized. The effect of such sustained practice is sometimes not hidden. Therefore, you aspire to practice. The effect is sometimes not apparent. Therefore, you may not see, hear, or know it. Understand that although it is not revealed, it is not hidden. The suggestion of this paragraph is that the vast majority of our practice is unseen, unknown, even to us. And isn't that true? My practice was there and with me and before me for a month and a half of travels. And yet it felt hidden to me. And we should expect that. And sometimes it's revealed. As it is not divided by what is hidden, apparent, existent, or non-existent, you may not notice the causal conditions that led you to be engaged in the practice. that actualizes you at this very moment of unknowing. The reason you don't see it is that becoming conscious of it is not anything remarkable. Investigate in detail that it is so, because the causal conditions, the aspiration, is no other than continuous practice, though continuous practice is not limited by the causal condition. So, those are the words of the Buddha, the words of Dogen, the word of Buddhas about continuous practice. It doesn't mean that it's easy. Dogen writes, in the continuous practice of the way of Buddha ancestors, do not be concerned about whether you are a great or a modest hermit, whether you are brilliant or dull. Just forsake name and gain forever, and don't be bound by myriad conditions. Do not waste the passing time. Brush off the fire on top of your head. Do not wait for great enlightenment, as great enlightenment is the tea and rice of daily activity. And we see that and hear that in all the stories I read of beating rice and serving others. Do not wish for beyond enlightenment, as beyond enlightenment is a jewel concealed in your hair. I can't conceal much in my hair. Maybe in my beard. If you have a home, leave your home. If you have beloved ones, leave them. If you have fame, abandon it. If you have gain, escape from it. If you have fields, get rid of them. If you have relatives, separate from them. If you don't have name and gain, stay away from them. Why should you not remain free from them, while those who already have name and gain need to give them up? This is the single track of continuous practice. Isn't that a hard section? What's it suggesting? That we should sacrifice all the things that are near and dear to us. What is it? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
Let go of the attachment, not necessarily your family.
How's that sound? Let go of the attachment to. That's the suggestion here. Examine your attachments. I think that's right. It's like that koan, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. We don't mean that literally, do we? I don't think so. We mean even the founder of our spiritual way, right? Even he is not someone who you should attach so firmly to that you lose your basic perspective. Because that attachment, even to the Buddha, could at some point become costly and a liability to you. At any rate, Han, I'm not going anywhere. To forsake name and gain in this lifetime in practice, one thing thoroughly is the vast continuous practice of the Buddha's timeless life. This continuous practice is bound to be sustained by continuous practice. Buddha's continuous practice is sustained by our continuous practice. And without our continuous practice, Buddha's continuous practice cannot be sustained. This is very, very heavy responsibility we have to continuous practice, isn't it? Love and respect your body, mind, and self that are engaged in this continuous practice. And then one more set of admonitions in this fascicle 16a about continuous practice, which I know everyone knows, but it can't ever be emphasized enough. Buddha ancestors have said since ancient times, living for 100 years without encountering a Buddha does not compare to living for one day and arousing the determination for the way. These are not merely the words of one or two Buddhas. They have been spoken and practiced by all Buddhas. Within the cycles of birth and death for myriad kalpas, one day of continuous practice is a bright jewel in the banded hair, the ancient mirror of all-inclusive birth and all-inclusive death. It is a day of rejoicing. The power of continuous practice is itself rejoicing. When the power of your continuous practice is not sufficient, and you have not received the bones and marrow of Buddha ancestors, you are not valuing the body-mind of Buddha ancestors, nor are you taking joy in the face of Buddha ancestors. Although the face, bones, and marrow of Buddha ancestors are beyond going and not going, beyond coming and not coming, they are always transmitted through one day's continuous practice. Therefore, each day is valuable. I told you all that in just a few months, 3, my son is going to go to college. My daughter joins us today from her college. We all travel and go off. And my intention is to live each of these coming days until that time with continuous practice. And then beyond. May we all have that intention to practice just this day of rejoicing. Day after day, may we practice continuously, even on those days when we're on a tour, playing a rock show, and seriously doubting whether we're engaged in continuous practice. May we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. Because as Dogen teaches in this 16a, this chapter, this fascicle, this essay, we are always practicing continuously. May we come to greater consciousness and awareness that that is what is happening and never not happening. It is that consciousness and that recognition wherein the rejoicing lays. And may we therefore feel more often our own joy about our continuous practice. Thank you.